And welcome to the Dallas International Film Festival. My name is Peter Simic. I'm the arts editor for D Magazine and the editor of the Front Row blog, which is D's arts and entertainment website. Each night during the fest, we've been out here interviewing some of the filmmakers that have come in for the festival. And tonight, we have Ben Bloodwell, whose documentary Biba, One Island, 879 Votes, has its world premiere tonight. So thanks for joining us on the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This movie takes place on one of the Mariana Islands, and it revolves a very small population that's electing a leader, a governor of the island. And I mean, one of the things that struck me is, where did you find this story, first of all? I mean, besides a great excuse to spend a few months in the Pacific, I guess.
Right. Well, that did turn out to be the case. But I actually was on another project in the neighboring island of Saipan. We were doing a film about Jack Abramoff for Alex Gibney. And we took a little day trip to Tinian, because there's some small dealings. I don't think it ended up in the actual film, but we met this amazing character named Don Farrell, who's just this wild historian. He's an expat from the United States who moved there and settled in and married a local wife. And he just started describing this election. He said, "It's a shame you guys aren't going to be here in in November, because there's this amazing grassroots election where the entire community comes out and with all these colorful characters," and started describing it to me. And I was just like, wow, I really want to come out here and see if there's a story. So a few weeks go by, I come back out and take another little vacation out there, and just to see if there's a story. And as soon as I met some of the characters there's this just adorably corrupt mayor. It's the only way to describe him, and his son, who's trying to get reelected to senator, actually, for the island. And then this young upstart who's sort of gathered his down and out clan to try and fight up against the powers that be. As soon as I saw that, I was like, this is a story that I have to tell. I think it has a lot to tell us.
Well, and when you're dealing with small communities like that, sometimes the hard thing as a documentary filmmaker is breaking in and gaining trust and all that. And you had that one American, the expat who'd been living there, and I imagine he was something of an introduction. But how was it getting able to get people to give you honest reactions and allow them to put their guard down a little bit?
It took a really long time. I mean, first of all, I have to say, the island, their community and their culture, it's just a very open community, and they welcomed me right in, and I never at any time felt like shut out. But right away I started talking to a few people, and I talked to one of the characters, Bill Singh. I came into his office one day, and he said, there's a rumor going around that you work with the CIA. So basically, because it was like this one really white guy walking around this island, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. So it very quickly became the common knowledge that I was working with the CIA undercover as a documentary filmmaker for some reason, and it all made sense. And I continuously had to dispel this notion. Like, I brought my wife out; she came out. My wife and producer, who's amazing and helped me out, she flew out, and we basically had to convince them that I wasn't in fact working for the CIA. And then finally, the last interview I did was with the mayor. And before we were setting up everything, and he pulls me aside and he says, well, I just want to ask you one question. Which area of the government do you work for again? Because he's trying to trap me into admitting I work for the CIA. So that was difficult. It did take a long time of me just sort of hanging out and drinking with them and eating their food. They all look very welcoming, and they have these big feasts of roast pig, and eventually they just sort of, what I've learned is, you don't try to sort of disappear. You just be yourself. You hang out and you be honest with them. And eventually they start being honest with you, which really is.
Well, you mentioned the roast pig, and it must be the most unique electoral process in the world. It seems like all they do is have picnics of these roast pigs every night as they kind of, try to get their coalition sort of support behind them. I mean, what was that scene like? Is that just a tradition of the island, or what is that?
It seemed like every weekend I ate 2 or 3 of these pigs. I mean, it's really amazing. They definitely not a very good diet that they have going there, but it is. I mean, one thing that was pointed out to me, because I'm making a film, and there's definitely some areas that you could critique the government on. There's corruption. There's some things that you'd say, well, this shouldn't be the way it is. But one thing that Trenton Connor, actually, is one of the main characters, told me in his interviews: if you look around here, say what you will, we're very poor. We don't have a great economy. We have a sort of broken government. But nobody's starving in the streets. They invite everybody to the table, and they constantly, your clan takes care of you, which is the flip side of sort of the, what a lot of the film is about, is sort of what happens when clan politics interferes with, democratic politics. And he said that's the flip side, is we all take care of each other no matter what. And that's something probably we could learn a lot from them.
Well, I mean, there is that the part for the whole element, which I think makes it a really intriguing movie. And you mentioned the corruption that seems to be evident in the government itself. So when you're putting the story together, how do you balance those two? Because there's an essential intrigue to this whole idea of this little town that's kind of corrupt, and there's all the casino stuff and the whole way that its history wraps up into America. But then there's sort of the microcosm story where
Right.
you're trying to show how democracy works in that sort of bubble. I mean, how do you balance the two?
Well, I don't think they're separate. Is really what I learned. I mean, it's interesting through the process of making the film. I sort of learned what I was making the film about, which I think is pretty common. But I think um, what I learned was what is perceived very quickly perceived as corruption isn't necessarily corruption. It's actually just democracy working. Because whatever you say, you watch the election. It's very monitored, and it's one man, one vote. It's an anonymous vote, and the only problem is that everyone on the island knows who you're voting for. And therefore, that determines whether you get a job or not. And you can call that corruption, or you can just call that democracy. I mean, we see a lot of examples of that in our own democracy, where they're representing their interest, and their interest is to get a job. And I'm going to vote for the guy who's going to give me a job. But that's what I've learned is it's not a separate thing. I think a healthy democracy doesn't necessarily mean a healthy government. And that's sort of what they have a healthy democracy there. What they really need now is a healthy economy and a healthy government, and the one doesn't naturally come from the other all the time or right away.
So it sounds like, I mean, you're talking about sort of illusions or ideals that we have about our own democracy that, when you actually look at how democracy functions, and this all actually gives you a great opportunity to give it that stripped down look,
right?
That it's somewhat other than where we're used to thinking about it.
Exactly, and I don't want to be too cynical about it. I still do believe, obviously, democracy, an American-style democracy, is still the best system in the world. I would never, but you do have to be realistic about what it does for you. I mean, we have a lot of things in this country, and democracy is one of them. And when we go into other countries and say, we'll put a democracy in there and fix all of our problems, I think we see a lot of reaping of that, what we sowed there, obviously, in countries like Iraq and now Egypt. And I think it's going to come up a lot more now with the Arab Springs, yes, it's great they have democracy, and that's a huge step forward, but don't be surprised and don't accuse them of having corruption when the guy you like doesn't win. And that's essentially the story I learned.
Well, you mentioned the story coming out of the process. How long did it take to take everything? How long were you shooting, and then how long to break it down in the editing process?
Well, I mean, the shooting process went relatively quickly, which is why I wanted to do the film. When I first there, I was like, it's a finite amount of time. It's an election. It's going to be over at a time I know. So I know I can just fly out there. I can shoot. I was out there for about 2 months overall, and we shot the election. I flew out there. I was alone for about a month. My wife and producer came out for 2 weeks at the head, and then I had a cinematographer and sound recordist come out for the actual election and the week leading up to it. And we shot about 80 hours of footage, and which isn't actually that much for a documentary. And I thought it would be a relatively easy editing process, but as it turns out, although I was assured that everybody speaks English on the island, as it turns out, all official functions are done in Chamorro, which is a language that's all but dead. I mean, it's an amazing language, and it's beautiful, and I grew to love it, but I also grew to hate it because nobody can translate it. And to go to the services that do it, it costs quite a bit of money. So we spent a lot of time whittling down the 20 to 30 hours of Chamorro into the very finite we needed actually translated well. And that ended up being like a year or two of sort of doing that all the time, editing and living our lives,
So you were editing in the foreign language without quite
Yes.
knowing what the translation was.
Yeah, and that was
Sounds scary.
challenging. That was very challenging, and you're constantly wondering, are you throwing things out? We had a very interesting process of sort of finding American citizens who speak Chamorro, who aren't necessarily translators, but we'd send a video camera to them and send a DVD with the timecode burn in, and they would watch the DVD and pause it and say what the person just said, which works in theory, but the problem is if you're not a translator, a lot of the things we got back would be like, descriptions of what was going on. They'd pause it and they'd say, wow, everyone seems to be having fun here. And
They're actually just watching the movie.
They're just watching the movie and making a commentary, and it's very hard to actually, they're all doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, so you can't really be like, well, that's not really what we need. So we luckily we actually, sort of a long story, but we ended up finding one of the founders of the CNMI, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, with which Tinian is one. He's one of the guys who actually wrote their constitution. And he ended up being this amazing guy named Ed Pangolinian. He's in D.C. He was the U.S. representative there. But he actually sat down and struck the deal with the United States. And he has these amazing photos with the president and shaking hands. And he ended up doing a lot of the translation for us. And through his translations, we were able to whittle down roughly what was going on in each scene and say, okay, these are the scenes that we think we really need a real translation for, which ended up being like an hour or two.
And this was your first film, so was this something where you were been waiting for the right opportunity to present itself, and now that it's done, is there anything else that you sort of have your sights on?
But yeah, exactly. This is my first film, and that's exactly what happened. Is I had for a very long time, actually, Maurice Alberti, was my longtime mentor, cinematographer, who's taught me everything about cinematography, and really I love like another mother, and she's been great to me. And her and I had been talking a lot about doing, oh, you got to go out and do a film. We got to do a film together. And finally, we were on this island together and met Don Farrell and said, this is it. This is the film. But now that it's done, in retrospect, I'm really glad I did it. But part of me really is thinking of a short film would be really amazing to do. So right now we're exploring ideas of doing short films, and there's a lot of once you open that up, it's a lot of things you can do.
Short documentaries.
Yeah, short documentaries, because there's a lot less expenditure of your resources and time, and you can do quick ones, and they can, you can do a bunch that aren't that great and get one out there that is really great and get that out to festivals, and that's what I'm going to focus on.
Well, great. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Great to meet you, and good luck.
All right, I really appreciate it. Thank you.